Hello everyone, my name is Rajesh Natarajan. I'm the Group CTO at GRRR Technologies. We at GRRR Technologies have been helping governments across the world establish core compute infrastructure for 2 decades now. And at the moment, we are especially focused on building solid AI infrastructure platforms.
Having louder, please, to our speakers because it's a bit noise around you.
Can everyone hear me? Excellent. All right. My name is Joseph Celestino. I'm Senior Vice President of Marketing for Blaze. Blaze is a publicly listed NASDAQ company. We focus on programmable AI computing platform that's purpose-built for edge inference. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for the introductions. So we're going to give a bit of context to this panel. As the demand for compute accelerates globally, the question is shifting from who builds the best models to who can support them at scale. So across data centers, energy systems, connectivity, and real-time deployment layers, Southeast Asia is emerging as a critical region in this shift. With growing digital economies, strategic geography, and increasing investment into data infrastructure, it has the potential to become a major hub for both training and inference workloads. Now, being the challenge is structural, can the region align performance, cost efficiency, energy availability, and regulatory coordination to compete globally? We're going to see what's up. Now, we're going to go from demand to deployment. From your current roles, where are you seeing the strongest demand for AI infrastructure across Southeast Asia today?
So, first, I can start. So your question is about where do you see the growth, the highest demand in AI infrastructure
Correct.
in Southeast Asia?
Yes.
So we're a public listed company, so anything that we say obviously will be part of. There's something that we have announced. So there's actually 2 announcements that we've had since we went public. Number one is our collaboration and partnership with Yoda, a contract in which we've signed last year for $56 million in regards to building smart surveillance or public safety within India. And the second one, so with that, you can automatically look and suggest that smart surveillance is one of the leading use cases that we've seen, specifically within edge AI in South Asia. Second one is that we've also announced a collaboration partnership with Nokia APEX specifically in going global. This is actually an exciting partnership because we've seen such a large opportunity that we've seen across APEC, specifically in transitioning from training onto inference. And if we see kind of a sum of the growth, I would see that there are use cases in verticals perspective, and any of the verticals that would like to utilize edge inference and kind of a moving from going to school and training and making money in inference, that's actually what we see in the largest growth.
Brilliant, thank you.
I just want to give a different spin to this because it's very important that we demystify what is AI infrastructure. Because more often what happens is people say AI infrastructure is equal to data centers. And that's technically not true because when you talk about AI infrastructure, you talk about edge computing, you're talking about data centers, you're talking about networking, you're talking about data infrastructure. So when you look at in totality our demand shaping up, across Southeast Asia. And Southeast Asia, while it's one cluster, but every country has its own unique dynamics. So the demand for AI infrastructure is growing everywhere. It's just a mix of every component which comprises of AI infrastructure varies. So in some countries, the demand for data center will be a lot higher than edge computing, and some for other countries it is something else. So I think it's important that we understand AI infrastructure in its totality, because otherwise, sometimes you may get listed by just one thing which is kind of being spoken about.
Brilliant. So I want to add to that another question on what are the main bottlenecks preventing the demand from translating into deployed and scalable infrastructure?
There are a bunch of factors that actually Okay. I think there are a bunch of factors that actually impact this particular space. The most common misconception is that having a data center is the be-all, end-all of things. I think it's very important for organizations, governments to kind of wake up and realize that AI is infrastructure, because that's what's actually leading the way forward for us. Along with that comes two critical points of conflict. One is power. I'll throw cooling in there as well, so that I can stick with my 2 points. And the second one is actually CapEx. AI is not cheap. Those GPUs, they just don't walk into your data center and say, hey, let me work for you for free. Doesn't work that way. So what's really happening in the industry right now is people are on the hunt for power. People are on the hunt for capital investments, so that these investments can actually spearhead the momentum that's actually trying to get generated. He spoke about India growing up with Yota. We announced with Yota as well. In fact, we were on stage with Yota about 2 or 3 hours ago, but talking about the growth in that particular region. But that in itself is just a testament of how different organizations across Southeast Asia are actually stepping up to the game and trying to make sure that the most basic necessities are no longer bottlenecks. So now the real bottleneck that really exists out there is just capital expenses. And companies like Gorilla, what we specialize in is we actually specialize in bringing private equity, and we try to turn the tables on the CapEx model into an OpEx model. So we tend to look at revenues over a period of 10 to 15 years instead of trying to take quick revenue out of the system. And by virtue of which we actually help treat an infrastructure as it's supposed to be treated.
Brilliant. You want to add something?
I just want to add, I think you got about great points. One thing which we are doing at PhD is, and that comes from the fact that we realize that while there's a lot of tech talent in the market, it's very important to upskill the talent so that they can deal with AI and AI infrastructure, AI algorithms. So upskilling of talent, I think is going to be very, very crucial. So that's one thing that we as organizations got to do to ensure that all the stakeholders are on the same page when it comes to technology, such that they're able to harness it to power.
Gio, over to you.
Yeah, so I'll build a little bit on what you said, right? So power, really important. CapEx, I think capital formation in general, and the kind of asymmetry between expectations of returns, right? Because ultimately, in my mind, this is a mix between sovereign capital, it's a mix between VC capital, and it's a mix between traditional first-line banking capital. Right? And that's a very difficult mix to get right, with difficult risk appetite statements and very different expectations on returns. But the only way this will work is if you mix all of them together. Now, I'm negotiating right now 2 deals with Tajikistan, and we have, I can't tell you the number, but we have by far the cheapest green compute energy in the world. Like literally 5 to 10x cheaper than whatever you can find, right? We have capital. We have enough sovereign capital for people to come and invest. In fact, most of the hyperscalers are more than happy to put up capital. The biggest problem we have, and we were sort of surprised, there's no demand, right? And so when you talk to inference compute in particular, there's this notion that it's everywhere. But if you look outside of the US and maybe China, actually it's not yet there. And I think a big part of that is because we're at an inflection point right now where a lot of these corporate enterprise POCs are slowly converting, right? Regulators getting up to speed, enterprise procurement cycles. And so my thesis is in the next 6 to 9, maybe 12 months, there'll be a massive influx in demand. But that's very difficult when the capital requirements to build today are very high. And so the last thing I'll say is early 2025, I think Microsoft kind of pulled out of the data center game, right? And in hindsight, it was a terrible decision. But at the time, it actually made a lot of sense because they didn't see an influx in demand, but they saw an influx in capital investment. Now, the game that you have to play is 15 years, right? Like, where do you see the demand coming? And then can you find a structure for the capital in a way that manages the risk of waiting for that to actually materialize?
Can I add this one? I like the statement in which building data center and actually putting a bunch of GPU in there is the first step. And having the interests of the data center enterprise and cloud service providers and building those infrastructure and making it available, right? The GPU rental, all this AIO is fantastic. But what's missing, I believe, in the adoption, this is at least from our experience talking with different providers and consumers, is that those infrastructure aren't infrastructure. Without the tool set, without the applications, and without something that's functional in which they can make money, right? So AI computing is just one part of it. You have to build the business logic. You have to combine those instruction sets, build the right wrappers, build the right schedule, and then you can build something that's functional for the enterprises to use and make money.
So now we're going to move on to another question. See Southeast Asia becoming competitive in high-performance AI training, or its advantage that is more structured in inference and real-time applications?
I don't know.
You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think there's a very healthy mix in between the two. And I would also suggest that, given the political condition of where the world is at today, there's a lot of shift happening because just the understanding the world is not that safe. So there is a lot of focus shift that's happening. And I think that's actually changing the game a little bit. At the majority, it is still AI training, AI inference. That need, that demand it continues to grow literally every week, every month, primarily because the cost of computer GPUs, as Anita keeps releasing, the next wave gets lower. Cost per token gets lower, which means that the overall appetite for consuming more tokens actually just increases. So life is good from that perspective. But the primary shift that we are seeing, at least in the market today, is on two specific aspects. As the cost per tokens decrease, newer use cases, which are less generative AI, but more traditional risk management, fraud detection, etc., is actually amplifying a great deal. And then the second thing where we are actually seeing is, and this is an area where companies like Blaze actually helps a lot, is trying to get that AI to the near edge. We used to talk about edge compute a lot back in the day, only to realize that the edge wasn't really the edge, it was the near edge. Funny definition of terms. And I think that there is a big shift happening in that particular space where this notion of centralized AI versus it being decentralized is actually getting really true. And I hope, and if my vision is good, I would say that companies like OpenAI, etc., while they will centralize AI training, they would want to move inference to the edge. And that will actually save a lot of data bandwidth costs at the end of the day. And it will also help go a long way towards protecting your own kind of data sovereignty or data security in that particular process.
Let me add a quick thing. So just for the first answer, you mentioned about the balance rates. This is something that we actually had an interview with our meeting with our customer as well. The cloud service provider basically quoted that they've seen about 15 to 50% increase in the demand for inference specifically. And this is coming from the enterprise, right? Cloud service provider. So they've seen kind of a shift. And we've seen actually this inference GPU now is becoming actually more of a kind of a trend, right, per se. And I'm not talking specifically the GPU inference that provide 700 billion or 100 billion of whatever size. We're talking about those that can provide some 20 billion. Because as we know, the model actually has been going through kind of a shift from the big to the small. And specifically it's because workload are very diverse. And then Rajesh basically just mentioned everything about our value proposition, so we appreciate that. Definitely, the inference market is diverse from perspective not only cloud, not only fog, but also embedded AI. And those things actually make this inference market to be so well diverse for everyone to participate, and everyone, all of us, to make money and be excited about it.
question for Gio. How should infrastructure strategies differ when optimizing for large-scale training versus low-latency distributed inference?
Sorry, so the question is how does the infrastructure space, how do you optimize it between inference and training?
Yeah, so like how these the infrastructure strategies differ when we're optimizing for large-scale training versus low-latency distributed inference?
I think honestly right now, like, at least in the projects I'm involved in, we don't really do that. Like right now, we're just trying to sell anything at the moment. So I'm being real, right? Because it's really interesting. People think there's this large, like, hypothetical, strategic conversations, but the truth is, you just kind of look at where can you monetize right now. Because we made a lot of investments in these things, so we just want to monetize. I will say this: like we are looking at like the country I'm talking about specifically, Tajikistan and Malaysia. Geographically, kind of like Switzerland in the area, right? You have China, you have Afghanistan, you have Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and so you can provide geographically really interesting low latency. We have already a pipeline to China. The issue for us is also geopolitical. China is a very interesting market for us. It's also an impossible market for us for other reasons, right? And so what we do, we focus, for instance, on Chinese companies that have set up outside of China, right? We want to have access to GPUs from NVIDIA, which we can do. And so we look at any model really where we can kind of make this. I'll say this much. A big part of our strategy now is focusing on training, because what we see is there's regionally a lot of appetite for sovereign LLMs, sovereign AI, AI government, and so a lot of them want to have specifically regional players there. They don't necessarily want to work with the hyperscalers in the US, and so that's become a big market. But it's a slow market because government moves slow and it takes time to build.
So if I might just add to what you said, and this is going from what Rajesh mentioned. When you look at the world that's ahead of us, it's going to be hybrid, right? It's going to be cloud and large compute happening at the edge. I think it's very important when you talk about inferencing. It's the AI ecosystem when you look at its totality. It's the AI at the edge which is going to be at the front and center of what happens over there. So how do you make AI at the edge real for our customers? How do you have a portfolio which can give the necessary compute which the customers want? How do you give this tools to software developers to develop applications behind the firewall on-prem? So those are the things which are really playing out, and we think from a technology standpoint, what we do at HP is essentially bring about these aspects and make AI at the edge real for customers. Because inferencing is going to be almost like 65% of AI compute in future.
Brilliant. On digital hubs and infrastructure, I would like to know for places like Singapore, what role do established hubs like Singapore and emerging markets in the region play in real-time AI applications? So, in enabling them, also from a distribution point of view.
Sorry, can you repeat that question again? What is the role of?
Digital hubs such as Singapore in the region in enabling the distribution of AI.
All right. So again, I'm going to bring back again something that we've announced and very excited about. Can you hear me okay now? Okay. We're announced something very exciting. We actually launched with Nokia, I mentioned collaboration. One of which actually, one of the steps for us to build and afford momentum in collaboration is building an innovation lab. And specifically innovation lab in Singapore. Because we believe that Singapore is the hub. It's the hub of, let's say, for multiple different connectivity within multiple markets, and also the connectivity for multiple innovations to come in. And this is the reason why we did that. The testing, the validation of AI infrastructure needs to happen in the place in which basically you have the most events, in which you actually are simulating real-life environment. You are building real-life use cases in the particular innovation hub. And that's what we do. So if you ask us basically what's the importance of digital hub, specifically in a very strategic area where demands are coming, it is utterly important. And this is something that we're actually proud to announce and actually check out kind of a summer innovation hub demonstration and showcases that's actually being jointly built and tested in Nokia in place.
I think I fully agree with you, and I also think Singapore, similar to UAE and Abu Dhabi and Dubai, are also specifically gateway hubs for capital formation. I go back to my point. Capital is super important. How you structure capital is super important. Singapore is effectively the financial hub for Asia already. It's also very investor friendly. It's very well trusted at a global level. So if you want to bring in whether it's private capital or sovereign wealth, I think this is the perfect place to structure the deals, and then you kind of distribute it at a more sovereign level in the different countries or federations.
And I add just one more. The other part also, I think that, again, that's, so we just spoke about the hub countries. Second, we talk about the capital. The third one actually is about the four markets here. Talking basically about airport, right? The immigration, transportation authority. Talking about maritime, which is essentially where, and so essentially this is the place where edge inference can really innovate. There's a lot of use cases and we can take advantage of how Singapore is building and also restructuring their environment to becoming more digitalized.
Brilliant. So I agree with the point on the UAE having hubs to one, founders HQ, etc., sovereign wealth funds, as you already mentioned. We also chose the region to establish ourselves. I want to go through fragmentation and markets again. And so I would like to know, so being Southeast Asia not a single market, what differences in regulation, connectivity, and policy do impact infrastructure deployment for you? Who wants to take that?
I'll go.
Right.
That's a pretty good question, but it's a very important question. And the reason why I say that is because, let's just go back to Singapore being a hub. There's a very important aspect of Singapore being a hub that often gets overlooked, which is the legal infrastructure that exists. So if you want to have a credible investment policy, investing out of Singapore actually helps a lot of companies like ours to actually get started because there's a good legal foothold. Like it's in your straw that's being practiced over there. You won't get anything equivalent to that say if you go to Malaysia, Indonesia, or even Thailand. So that in itself is a very strong foothold to start building the enterprises of government. It's point number one. It doesn't mean that the other countries are not quite ready, but I think that the legal structure, especially from an investment background, is exceptionally important. Once you get past that particular legal structure, they talk about policies of local governments. I think each and every government in Southeast Asia is trying their very best and they're doing a damn good job of it as well. Like if you think about the last 5 years and you talk about data centers across the world, it's only one country that pops up. It's called Malaysia. The second wave of that is Indonesia, right? And now, India, Thailand, they're all trying to fight for that particular third wave, including Vietnam, as far as, just the data center policies are concerned. But each government, each of these areas, they're trying to make sure that the right subsidies are in place, the right economic development zones are in place. And I think that nations are learning from each other. More importantly, they're also learning from the mistakes that the others have made. And so the sum totality of where we are at today is that the legalese is probably the biggest concern that most investor-centric companies have an issue. But outside of that, when you look at regional policies, some policies might be a little more flexible for one thing versus another policy for another thing in another country. But at the end of the day, it's all about striking that particular balance, right? As long as we can strike that balance, I like what Giovanni said, there's money to be made.
Brilliant. And as a follow-up question for the rest of the speakers, what would need to happen for the region to operate as a more coordinated AI infrastructure ecosystem?
Sorry, Laura, can you repeat again? I want to make sure I understand the context of it.
Yes. So, follow-up question to the previous one. What would need to happen for the region to operate as a more coordinated AI infrastructure ecosystem?
Sorry, I take a stab at this. I don't think there's such a thing today. Because
I believe
Let's agree on that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I believe everybody's trying to look out for themselves and trying to make sure that their needs are being met. I've always believed this. I said this last year when I was over here. Charity begins at home. So every country is going to look out for what they need in order for them to be successful. In the world of sovereign AI, whether that's sovereignty at a national level or at an organization level, I believe what is really happening is they are trying to figure out how to become homogeneous for themselves. We've tried, we've lived in this space forever where we've tried to build a single system of communication. You still can't have a constant text messaging between iPhone and Android after so many years, right? So I think that's a dream. It'll happen maybe 5-10 years from now.
I think
To me, is also a function of, if you look at countries which comprises, make up Southeast Asia, each country had a different stage of maturity. So having like one size fit all approach also may not work. So a unified framework is good, but it's very, very important that we are able to take care of the local nuances which are there. The language, the technical education population which exists over there. So we have to ensure that we're taking care of all these things. So we don't have to have one unified framework to achieve the goals that we have.
And I have a bit on this. So it dawns upon me actually back in 2016, 2017, I was part of the board member for Linux Foundation, and we actually attempted to define an open solution reference for 5G. And back in the days, that's basically early days of Edge IoT. Now we tried. We have over 2 dozens of the Summit telcos in the world to find out how solutions should be. What is the architecture? What is the CPU that you should put? What is actually the MEC, which is low edge computation now? What is the core function and so forth? I will say this as a fact. What we learned from there is what we bring down. What we learned is that there is actually some common elements that's basically needed. And those common elements basically requires for it to have not standards specifically, but best practices. Providing basically a standardized platform. Going to platform instead of basically integrated systems or client space and so forth, or basically a big software stack. That's one side. So platformization, something modular that can be used basically across systems and so forth. The other part that basically we learned about on the coordinated effort is that when you have a bunch of different people coming together from different organizations and different countries, specifically within the region, they bring certain and distinct use cases that's actually challenging for their particular place. Indonesia being basically a large landscape, in Middle East basically having basically desert place, right? Very, very hot. And then also India basically having where the urban populations is so unsaturated, right, from that perspective. My point of that saying is that that's actually what we need for AI. There's a contextualization basically needed, in which you need to understand different landscape and then bring that. The great thing about AI now compared to the past, we have a good AI processor innovation. The compute basically is so advanced and the softwareization is so advanced to the point that we can contextualize those and make it very specific for the particular. So I would say a distributed, coordinated effort instead of a centralized coordinated effort.
So yeah, let me just plus one on you and plus one on you and plus one on you. And let me add something to the base, because at the end of the day, you can replace AI or infrastructure for anything, right? Defense, whatever. This is geopolitics at the core of it. So for the last 18 months, I was part of a UN working group, and we were drafting a resolution called Regional Collaboration and AI Governance in Central Asia. We ultimately got it adopted, which was great. But behind the scenes, I can tell you this is pure politics. Because at the end of the day, people have different incentives, different objectives, and so aligning those is very hard. Now, where we landed is actually some level of what you call high-touch coordination. What that means is this. Kazakhstan was one of the first nations to roll out AI Gov. They've done a tremendously good job. They did all of the unsexy work of cleaning up the data and building the data lakes. So now in the region, if you want to go in AI Gov, you go to Kazakhstan, you buy their modules, right? The GITEX started at the green compute. We have a lot of hydro, so we have the data centers and we have the model architecture. So if anyone in Central Asia wants that, they come to the GITEX. But this is a reflection of an existing geopolitical coordination that already was there. You cannot force that. You cannot force it through a technology on something that doesn't exist. Right? C5+1 countries were already collaborating. They just decided to cut the AI pie in ways that align with their strengths and their willingness and ability to invest. But to actually do it at a scale to say, let's all go in, hard.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, since we need to wrap up as we're running out of time, I'm gonna have like a lightning round with one word response, like a sentence response. Yeah. So on capital partnerships and strategic control, what partnership models are proving most effective in accelerating the infrastructure build-up?
Partnerships.
What partnerships are proving most effective in accelerating infrastructure build-up? So government, private sector, etc.
I think to me, the entire ecosystem has to come into place. Government, education institutions, corporates, you know, venture capitalism, funding. So the entire ecosystem has to come into place for things to keep up.
Brilliant, thank you, Joe.
I agree. Government control, all partners involved.
I'm going to plus one on that, but I'm going to specifically emphasize on PPP relationships with the government and private sector, because energy is a main draw over here. And if you do not have government backing for that, there is no infrastructure that's going to be done.
Brilliant, Johnson.
+4, I guess. But the other part is small, modular, and specific kind of private or public sectors and public sectors. If you try to solve all, you will not get there. And also, public versus private. Public basically, specifically for either public funded company or public company, there's some urgency. Private company basically maybe a little bit less urgency in some cases because there's a little bit more money in venture capital for long-term kind of an investment and capitalization. That's what I would actually define it. So basically, I think the mix of diversity of different kinds basically will create something a little bit more functional and a little more productive.
That makes sense. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your insights. I want to ask a big round of applause for our speakers. Thank you for joining us.